Hi there. Today we're going to be exploring the subject of Islamism and terrorism. Now this is a difficult subject to tackle just because of the complexity of it. But we're going to try, and we're going to succeed, in fact I would say, in unraveling where they came from, these ideologies, and why we're facing the challenges that we are in tackling these terrorist groups. But in order to do that, we've got to look at the origins of ISIS, the present day terrorist organization which is committing horrendous atrocities right across the world. In the Middle East, they've obviously caused destabilization, mass murder, genocide. We're seeing their actions also in the West, in Western Europe, where they, through using the migrant crisis, were able to infiltrate the various countries of Europe and in fact launch attacks on those populations in France and Germany and so on. And we've seen in fact these very same things happen in the US, the United States, these so-called lone wolf attacks and whatnot, as well as the Boston bombings and the more recent tragedies which have happened in a slew right across the US. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of this. Now, the origin of the present day group known as ISIS, we have to get to grips with that, and we have to start understanding it if we are ever going to properly tackle it. ISIS is led, of course, by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who holds 2 doctorates in Islamic theology and Islamic history. Now, al-Baghdadi was, of course, a student of Musab al-Zarqawi. Now, a lot of you may not be familiar with some of the names we're going to get into here, but it's important that you do become familiar with them in some sense, or at least know about them, even if peripherally, just to have a better understanding. Al-Zarqawi, of course, was, as I say, affiliated with Al-Qaeda, and he was a student of Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden himself was the founder of Al-Qaeda, and he masterminded the 9/11 attacks as well as numerous other terrorist atrocities across Africa, the Middle East, the US, and other various places as well. Now, bin Laden was himself a student of Zawahiri. Zawahiri, Ayman Zawahiri, was the founder of Islamic Jihad. That was a separate sort of terrorist group that split off from Muslim Brotherhood, which we're going to get into in a second. But Ayman Zawahiri, as I say, was not only the founder of Islamic Jihad, but created a brand new method within it in order to accomplish the goals that they were setting out to accomplish. Zawahiri, as well as being a member and founder of Islamic Jihad, was a student of Sayyid Qutb. Now, Sayyid Qutb was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, this name is going to become quite important to you. And the reason for that is that Sayyid Qutb authored what could be called the definitive jihadist text. And it was titled Milestones. It's known as the terrorist handbook. Almost every terrorist who has been caught has used it in some form, or they've had it in their possession. And he was a student, Sayyid Qutb, of Hassan al-Banna, who was, of course, the founder of Muslim Brotherhood. Now, we got into a little bit of this in one of my previous videos, where we were exploring the origin of Islamism ever so slightly. And we were linking it to Muslim Brotherhood, and this is exactly how this chain can be seen. In this instance, it's a little bit more demonstrable, and it is very, very real in terms of how you can see the direct links even today between the Muslim Brotherhood, which still exists, and these various other terrorist organizations, which also still exist, and ISIS. They are basically fundamentally the one group. This is what very few people will tell you. They're not separatist groups. Yes, they vie for power, but they're not separatist groups. They're all under the one umbrella, and that umbrella could be termed Islamism. Now, Hassan al-Banna, as well as being the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, was affiliated with the family of Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab. Again, a lot of you may not be familiar with that name, but he was the founder of Wahhabism, or Wahhabism, which is a very, very orthodox brand of what might be termed political Islam. This is the man who politicized it by and large in modern times. Now, not only was al-Banna affiliated and associated with Wahhab and Wahhab's family, but he was also affiliated and associated with the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia. This is one of the reasons why the Muslim Brotherhood worked so hard at keeping and maintaining the House of Saud in power within what is modern day Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, of course, is named after King Saud, its first king. It didn't exist. A lot of people don't know this, but Saudi Arabia did not exist until it was created by various groups and forces that were looking to shape the structure of the world. But this is important for you to know, because if we look at the extreme version of Sharia law that's being implemented in Saudi Arabia, we'll begin to understand why Saudi Arabia is the country that it is. Its doctrine at its core, and this may shock a lot of people, it might not if you're already familiar with these things, but its doctrine is fundamentally jihadist. It is there, it exists as a state to export terror. And the really distressing thing about this is that we actually have very close trade ties with them for the purposes of getting oil, for which we pay mass amounts of money to them, with which they actually fund a lot of this terror that is currently sweeping the world. The US especially, Britain also, but the US especially, calls them our allies. And I've never understood this. I've never completely come to terms with why we would designate them as allies just because we've got US bases, military bases in Saudi Arabia. Because that one single country has done more to destabilize that region than virtually anybody else. I mean, it's absolutely shocking. But anyway, we're going to get into why Wahhab held the religious views that he did, and how he was able to amass that following which he did. So we have to ask the question, where did Wahhab get his ideology? And we find the answer being that he took it from orthodox Islamic sources. What are these Islamic sources, you might wonder? Well, you have the Sirah, which is the biography of Muhammad. You have the Hadith, which are the teachings and the sayings of Muhammad. You've got the Taqlid, which is the history up to the time of Muhammad. And you've got the Tafsir, which are commentaries on the Quran itself. And finally, of course, there's the Quran, which the Islamic world believes to be a direct revelation from Allah. The first of these works, coupled with the rest of them, so the Quran in coupling with the Sirah, Hadith, Taqlid and Tafsir, constitute what has become known as Sharia law. Now, Sharia law was condensed and put together in this particular book, Reliance of the Traveller, which is the classic manual, it says here, of Islamic sacred law. So it's the legal jurisprudence, but that comes from these 5 books, which are orthodox Islamic sources. So it didn't pop out of nowhere. Wahhab didn't get his ideas from nowhere. Neither did al-Baghdadi. You have to remember, this is a man who holds 2 doctorates, who understands Islamism, and the subject areas for his doctorates were in fact Islam. So he knows what he's talking about in terms of the caliphate, as much as people would like to disavow him from actually propagating Islamic ideology. The truth is that he is. So this is why it's such an uncomfortable territory for a lot of people to talk about these things, because you have to then start directly confronting many of these facts, objective facts, and it can't be done by most people because of political correctness. This is why in the first video, the very first video that I put up, I was explaining the importance of free speech, right? Because we have to be able to talk about these things. And right now, we've got laws that are censoring us from talking about these very things. Anyway, I don't want to go into a tirade about this. I just want to explain the very real dilemmas that we're facing. In the next segment, we're actually going to go deeper into the rabbit hole, as it were. So let's look into the official history of Islam, as it's taught by places like Al-Azhar University. There are some inconsistencies here which can be very easily pointed out in terms of what people are told, this canonized history that they accept. But we're not going to get into that. We'll just stick to the official history as it's told to us by Islamic scholars and sources themselves. So the official history of Islam goes like this. 610 AD to 622 AD, Muhammad experiences his first set of revelations. Now, the revelations of the Quran supposedly came in 2 parts. The first set came when Muhammad was living in Mecca. The second set of revelations came about when Muhammad had to flee and was at that point living in Medina. Now there's a distinct difference in both sets of revelations, and the difference is this. The Meccan revelations, which are the earlier revelations, are profoundly peaceful and non-violent. So they try and advocate non-violent, a non-violent understanding of the world, which is a good thing, right? So then you might wonder why it is that organizations like Al-Qaeda or like ISIS or the myriad of other terror groups under the one umbrella are doing what they're doing. And the answer is simple. This comes down to the Medina revelations from 622 AD to 632 AD, which are violent, they're anti-Semitic, they promote killing non-believers, i.e. kafirs. So this is the point at which Muhammad has amassed enough men within his organization to set about the business of conquering. Perhaps it's possible psychologically. He was obviously an unstable man, and I'm not saying that as a, I'm not maligning his character. In these texts that we've mentioned, if you actually look at what takes place, it kind of does suggest, I would argue, an unhinged personality, an antisocial personality disorder within him, a psychopathy essentially. But again, we'll not get into that just now. So, as I say, the later verses are violent, the earlier verses are non-violent. So you might wonder, well, okay, so why don't they just reject the later violent verses and instead adopt the peaceful ones, especially since they would promote good values, good ethics, because people are always talking about this concept of reformation of Islam and And it's a good thing that they're looking at these things. But actually, if people that have a good moral compass, that is, who just happen to be born into Islamic households, which is sad, I would argue. But the problem with that is Islam can't be reformed that way, and the reason is because the foundational texts which created it demand that it not be so, and here's why. You have this law of abrogation. Some of you may be familiar with it, some of you not so much. So I'll try and explain it slightly. You see, according to the law of abrogation, which is in the Quran itself, in Surah 2:106 and Surah 16:101, the later verses are the stronger verses and thus must be adhered to, whereas the earlier verses, if they contradict the later verses, must be rejected. That is fundamentally the law of abrogation. And what that means in Sharia law, in that context of Islamic law, is that all Muslims must, by definition, adhere to the violent, anti-Semitic, murderous verses. There is no escaping that for them. And if Muslims aren't doing that according to their doctrine, then they're seen as bad Muslims in the light of the orthodox worldview, which is profoundly twisted, I would say, in terms of its ethics. So that's important to keep in mind. We're going to get into it a little bit more, but as I say, there is a peaceful part to it. There is a peaceful part to Islam in the Islamic text, but it doesn't get a chance to really take root in people. Unlike with other religions, and I should stress I'm not religious myself, but unlike other religions like Christianity or Judaism, which I've also studied, or Hinduism or Sikhism or Buddhism or Jainism, there's so many of them we could name. Unlike these texts, you can't cherry pick, you can't pick and choose, which makes it very, very difficult for forward-thinking Muslims to adopt and adapt a value system which is in accordance with Western civilization. Now, there are 3 stages of jihad, or the concept of jihad, which is to wage a holy war. The first stage is the pen stage. This is where you get the propaganda, the leaflets, the videos, the encouragement to join Islam as a peaceful, wonderful theology, which it certainly isn't. But you'll get that, and we saw that through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and pretty much that stage is always ongoing, incidentally, because they start to run concurrent to each other, these stages. The second stage is the scale stage, where you have the imposition of Sharia law in host countries. Now that might strike a chord with some of you, because you'll be noticing that's already happening, the creeping in of Sharia law, the political movements, the pushing to accept Sharia law in your countries. That's probably one of the most dangerous points to be at, because that's the stage at which you get tipped over in terms of infiltration methods in Islam. The third stage, if the non-believers don't accept Islam, is the sword stage. In the sword stage, as the name implies, you get escalating acts of violence. And again, we're seeing that obviously. See, this is all inside those books that I mentioned earlier, because it's all dependent and based on the life of Muhammad himself. But they don't want you to know that. And the PC police out there don't want you to know that. And the politicians don't want you to know that. That's why this is so terrifying for people that have obviously, such as myself and many others, who have got an understanding of what this ideology actually is, we recoil in horror because we're seeing this capitulation to an extremist ideology. We're not seeing anyone really combating it. We're seeing the opposite. We're seeing censorship. We're seeing silencing of people that are trying to teach other people. That cannot be allowed. Can't be allowed, especially when we are in the sword stage of jihad. Now again, anyone worth their salt inside the intelligence agencies around the world knows about this. They could tell you. They probably would tell you if their governments allowed them to, because they're fighting this every single day on the front lines. So it's important that you take in as much of this information as you can. Seek out other forms of information as well. Look into other people that are trying to teach anyone who's listening about the dangers of these things. Because again, this isn't going to end well for us if we don't start waking up from this extreme slumber. We've been asleep practically at the wheel while they've been wide awake. The jihadists have been wide awake. They've been paying attention. And they've been looking for chinks and weaknesses in these countries in order to collapse them. So keep this in mind. Anyway, let's move on. So let's look at some of the official history of Muhammad's life. 624 AD, the Battle of Badr, the entire Banu Kainuka family, the tribe, was slaughtered. In 625 AD, he waged the Battle of Uhud, where the entire Banu al-Nadir family was slaughtered. In 627 AD, after the trenches, the entire Banu Qurayz tribe family was slaughtered. I think we're beginning to see a little pattern here. The women from those tribes were brutally raped and kept as sex slaves. This is a man who consummated marriage with a 9-year-old girl. Married her at the age of 6. This is the man who Islam proclaims is the perfect man. The example that all good Muslims should follow. Let that sink in for a minute. The Quran states outright that they have to follow his example. Excuse me. And they are following his example. If you look at what ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, if you look at what they're doing right now, right across the Middle East, they are in fact following his example. If you look at what's happening in Germany right now, with the terror attacks and the mass rape of women, the sexual abuse, the damage that's being done to the young and the old alike, they are following his example. And these are just the facts. These are the same facts that they're taught as they're taught in Al-Azhar University, for example. in Egypt? Can somebody like that really be the perfect moral example that people should follow? In Sweden, the same thing's happening. In France, we're starting to see the rise of these exact things. And yet we're not allowed to talk about them. We're not supposed to discuss them. People are being jailed in Germany by people who are trying to be politically correct in the political sphere from speaking about the facts. They're being prevented from understanding objective realities. And again, everything I've presented here is fully verifiable. You can read all the texts that I've spoken about yourself, and you will come to the same conclusions. But we have this era of censorship that wants to prevent us speaking about these things. But to that we have to say no. We have to get this information out there, because this utter civilizational collapse that we're experiencing, very few people have the courage to really stand up and to push back, or to simply even just speak the truth, because it's such a dangerous time to do so. Anyway, I'm going to move on, and we'll look into some more sources and source texts to see what they tell us. Now, the Quran tells us something interesting, which is that there's no salvation for any adherent of Islam without waging jihad on the non-believer, the unbeliever, the kafir. This is a concept that is unique to Islamic Orthodox doctrine. And we see this in the Quran, Surah 474 and Surah 47, verses 4 to 6. He who fights in the cause of Allah and is killed or achieves victory will bestow on him a great reward. Now that tells you that there is an impetus upon a person to die in the cause of Allah, to die in the cause of Islam. And so this explains to us the phenomenon of suicide bombings, for example, which are widespread, of course, or just suicide in general in order to achieve some militaristic aim. You'll also find in the next verse that we're going to read, some of the things will prove to be quite troubling for you. When you meet those who disbelieve, strike their necks until you have inflicted slaughter upon them. Strike their necks. That's what it's saying. That's straight out of the text itself. Now, that is exactly the way in which Muhammad carried out the mass slaughters that he did. And this is the way that ISIS, and it's no accident that ISIS are doing exactly the same thing in terms of beheadings. For example, when they take prisoners, they'll behead them. This is the reason for it, because they're told to strike at their necks. So this is basically encouraging a form of psychopathy in people. And that's not to say that everyone who considers themselves a Muslim is going to do things like that. Of course not. Because there is an influence of the societies in which they live. People do have some semblance of sense for the most part. However, the people that are already on the fringes of society are always going to be susceptible especially when they've got this implanted in their subconscious, or their conscious mind even in some cases, to go out there and to become more radicalized. You see, Islam already radicalizes them from the get-go. Then what happens is people who have a radical mindset already get pushed into becoming jihadists. So this is why this information again is so important. It needs to get out there. Again, part of the reason why I'm making this video. Many people are trying to do what I'm doing also, and they're managing to do that quite successfully, quite well, which I'm happy about. But we all need to understand these things, I think. So I'm going to close here by just explaining that Islam is not just a religion. It's a military stratagem for the absolute takeover of any region or country or area. Not only is it militant in this regard, but also it's political, because it's seeking to depose the political systems which already exist in any host nation. So this is why I think we have to be aware of these things. And if you've sat through this, I just want to thank you very much for doing so, because it's not easy to go through this much information and absorb it all. So I think you've done brilliantly if you've gotten this far, and thank you so much again for watching this video. Carry on, keep up the good fight, and make sure that you're always fighting on the side of freedom. Thank you.